When a derby comes to town, there is more than just 3 points on the line. It's about a deeper rivalry, bragging rights, packed stadiums, passionate supporters, repaying past debts and writing new history. They are always the biggest games of the season. But after the scores are settled and the fog clears, it is those additional 3 points in your row on the table that often brings the most satisfaction. 3 points that not only denote victory over the enemy, but also contribute to the context of your season. For Auckland, their 3 derby points means the Premier's plate is almost within reach. And the lack of any 3-point getters in Melbourne means that any true, consistent competitor for second place is yet to reveal themselves. Victory and City missing out on their chance to do just that. Elsewhere, Kota and the Jets are a match made in heaven. The Wanderers prove a point. The undermanned Reds struggle to keep it together, whilst their young guns are off winning Asian Cup quarterfinals. The young Socceroos qualified for the Under-20 World Cup on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight, Jacob Stevens. It must be conflicting feelings for you because your Adelaide team have struggled a little bit over the past few weeks, but what an achievement for those young Socceroos.
Yeah, and for so many of them to be from South Australia as well. It's exactly that. It's conflicting because it's like, well, look at how good football is in this state that, you know, they're going on to do this for an Australian side, but then also it comes at the cost of potentially Adelaide's title chances. So yeah, it sucks a little bit, but no, it's awesome to see that, you know, the young Socceroos are back in the Under-20 World Cup. It's been a long time. So, you know, it's a chance to go out there and, you know, we've spoken quite highly of this crop of youngsters that they've got in the squad at the moment. So it's a chance for them to really prove their worth, and they're already doing that in the Asian Cup so far. So yeah, it's good signs.
Absolutely. We'll touch on them a little bit later in the show, but Christian Montegan, to start with, the theme of the agenda at the top of this show is all about derby ramifications and what it means this late in the season. Obviously, you have all the usual derby anticipation building up, but the 3 points, especially this season in the A-League, means so much more given how tight everything is towards the top end. And we're going to start in New Zealand, and for me, Auckland's absolute dismantling of the Wellington Phoenix on Saturday afternoon means that they've really got the Premier's plate right there wanting for it, and knowing that they get to play Adelaide, who are their direct competitors for it this weekend, it could almost be sealed up in a couple of days' time.
Quite scary the way they absolutely tore apart Wellington, right? Like from a Phoenix perspective, 2 different versions, right? I mean, you look at that first half. First half an hour, you could tell Wellington were playing decent. I mean, they obviously weren't creating not near enough to threaten Auckland's defence, and you can tell the goal was going to come. It was just how long can Phoenix, you know, keep them out, and it only took about the 30th minute mark to the floodgates started to open, and it was like the central pairing in defence, just the whole back four just didn't look themselves compared to 12 months ago. It's just a real stark contrast. And yeah, for Chiefy, it's like, what more can you do really with this team? I think he's sort of lost for answers a bit. I think the defence is all over the place at times, and Auckland just, once they found their mojo and they sort of picked them apart, then there was no looking back. They had that intensity, and the momentum was just fully with them, and obviously carried that into the second half, and there was just all one-way traffic, unfortunately, in terms of for a neutral point of view, because you want to see these derbies as really close, intense, last-minute winners, but yeah, 6-1 scoreline doesn't read pretty, doesn't it, for Wellington? And we've known this for a while that, you know, top 6 is probably out of the realms of possibility for them, especially these past few weeks, the way they've been performing, not just picking up the results, but like I said, the identity and the blueprint in terms of playing out from the back and moving forward, it just isn't there this season. So yeah, fully deserved victory, obviously, for Auckland, and that puts them, 8 points clear now of Adelaide in second, and you've got to say, pretty much wrapped up the title. It's got to be an absolute disaster for them not to pick it up. You look at the table, they've conceded 13 goals for the whole season. Like, that's just, for a debut team in the A-League, that's incredible, right?
For any team.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the Wanderers statistic was when they first entered, because I know from memory that they definitely had a solid defence under Popovic, and they probably had a similar number, but that's probably the only team I can remember, you know, for a new club coming into the A-League putting up these numbers. It's just ridiculous. And remember, they lost 4-0 to Western United at home, so that number should be lowered, really. I mean, it was just a sort of an off day, and they've just looked, really frightening. Moreno down on the left, just a hat-trick. Again, class play. Just the way in the off-season how they've been able to pick these gems, and Steve Corica has been able to mould this group together. It's been pretty impressive. So, look, you'd have to say they're favourites to go all the way and actually win the championship, let alone finish first in the regular season. It's like, at the moment, who's really going to stop them? I mean, we saw the other derby, which we'll touch on, Victoria and City. Like, do they look overly convincing that they're going to trouble Auckland? Like, obviously on any given day, the A-League is so open, we know that, but you only need one team like Auckland to stamp their authority and defensively well-structured. When you get a team like that in the A-League, it's very, very difficult to see anyone else stopping them. So they're in a really good position.
Yes, the Wanderers conceded 21 goals in their inaugural season over 27 games. So Auckland 13 from 17 now. That's that's about the same rate, right? If not.
And do you know who's second most less conceded goals? Who's ranked second? This came as a shock to me.
City. Wow.
Yeah,
I'm just reading that.
17 conceded. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't expect that, considering at least the rough patch of form.
But, City's problem's been the other side of the pitch, though, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have the Wanderers sitting just above them with 39 goals scored and 31 conceded. It's a very different story, isn't it? But just bringing it back to this game, Jacob, it's funny. Like, this game was such a blowout, and it's probably a good representation of how people are considering these two teams now. At the start of the season, it was Wellington coming off their best season ever, and the new boys who looked pretty strong, and the banter was there. It was competitive, but it's almost felt that as the disparity has become clearer and clearer, the banter has kind of fallen off a little bit, because it's almost not as funny if you're picking on the little kid that's losing all the time, right? It's kind of fallen off because Auckland are just that good.
Yeah, like when it's close games, like it has been in this rivalry so far, right? Well, was it 2-0 and 2-1 or something, I think, so far this season in the other two fixtures between these two sides? Like, relatively close games. And obviously that 2-0 as well, it was tight right up until the Oluwayumi mistake right at the end of the game. So, when it's like that, you can sort of give a bit and get a bit, and it goes back and forth. But yeah, when it's a 6-1 like this, it kind of just kills it off dead for a little while. And, I think Wellington will be thinking, oh, thank God that was the last one this season, because they'd probably be heading into the next one just absolutely mentally ruined. So it's a chance to, go back at them next season now and hopefully, start off on the stronger foot. But yeah, completely just a morale destroyer, that one. The thing is that Wellington, they probably didn't come in with the expectation that they were going to win, right? It's in Auckland. Auckland are just absolutely dominating everybody, as we've just touched on. And it's a Wellington side that's really struggled so far this season. But 6-1, and it looked like after the first couple, they'd almost just packed it in then and there and just given up at that point. And it just felt like, I don't know, there's something not quite right there at the club. And what is it? Why are they not getting motivated for these games? This is the biggest game of the season sort of thing, right? It's your rivalry games. And the players aren't motivated to go out there and fight for it. So it's a little bit disappointing to see them slip down from what they were doing so well last year, right? Which was just completely shutting opponents down, controlling games by dictating the tempo both on and off the ball. It's not something they've been able to do this season. And, yes, they've had a lot of players out, both leaving on transfers and also in injuries. So Italiano hasn't had the, huge squad to work with again and all of that. But it's still, even just the principles just don't seem to be there. And that's the really shocking thing, because, we're always speaking quite highly of Italiano and what he does as a coach. But I think in this game, it looked like he got just about everything wrong. Like they weren't motivated, they weren't set up right, they were making mistakes in fundamental simple passages of play. They were giving the ball away way too easily, they were playing into Auckland's hands. These are things that Italiano, even if his Wellington side is having a bad day, they're not making mistakes that directly benefit the opponent most times. So yeah, it just seems completely out of character, and I think that's the way to sort of characterize the whole season, even, is just out of character for them based on what we saw last season. And I feel for the fans, because they'd have been coming in riding high this season thinking, okay, if we can just do one or two little things differently and improve in these couple of areas, we could push on and we could win the title. And now it's your upstart rivals the other side of the country that are going and doing it. So it's a little bit disappointing. And but then on the Auckland side of things, 6-1 win over your rivals. There's no way they don't win the title from here on out, to be honest. So,
if Adelaide beat them at the weekend, that's the one sniff, right? This is a big game.
That is a massive if, though.
But even if Adelaide win, you still can't see with a 5 point, because Adelaide are going to drop points, whereas Auckland, they're going to be super consistent. So even if Adelaide do somehow win, you still don't see it.
The thing with Auckland is, just how do you beat them? Like the games that they've lost so far this season, obviously that Western United one just sort of came as a surprise. It started that run that Western went on that now finds them up in finals after being locked in for bottom 4 for the first part of the season. And then it was a 1-0 loss away to Perth, and they were down to 10 men. Like, it just sort of seems like, Christian, like you said, just so consistent. There's nothing you can do to stop them. They're conceding less than 1 goal a game. Like, how can you compete with that? That's ridiculous. That's saying basically they're guaranteeing themselves a point every game at that rate. It's absurd. So, look, yes, if Adelaide get the win over Auckland, it brings it closer again, and maybe that'll start a bad run of form. But that requires that to happen in the first place, which I think is highly unlikely. And even then, I think that Auckland is still just too good to not rebound from that and push on and win the title anyway. I think at this point they've got it wrapped up.
Look, I'm definitely prepared to make the call if Adelaide don't win at the weekend. Both of them are on 17 games played, so that's 9 left, and the gap is 8. So as soon as we get to a point a game territory, it gets pretty dicey for sure. Christian, what a month of football that Nader Moreno is having. He's become the goal-scoring machine for Auckland as well. He's been a big part of this run of 4 straight wins they've had. 6 goals and 1 assist in their last 5 games. He had that late winner off the bench against the Wanderers. He's forced Steve Corica to give him a starting role, and he's rewarded that faith with a hat-trick in this game, arriving at the right place at the right time, but then that final goal as well was an absolute beauty to cap it off. He's been a revelation for this team recently.
And you see with these new clubs, you need players like this to really, it's all well and good playing out from the back and, keeping that good solid defence, but you need players in the final third who can make this difference, and Moreno is certainly one of those players, right? So, when Auckland do get out of tight spaces, they can drive, in numbers, and Moreno is one of those players who really just pulls everything together, right? He can distribute passes, he's got a good eye for goal, he's got a bit of everything, and that's what Corica, I think, loves about him. So they've already got a couple of players like that in the squad. So, it's like, where do you find a flaw? Like Jake was saying before, it's like they're just so consistent, and I think there will come a time where other teams will, be able to, pick apart this Auckland team. They'll be able to find ways to break them down, and they'll start to learn about them. Because we saw last year with Wellington, for example, like this season, completely different, and we've been joking how Chiefy's been talking too much of the presses, and coaches have been taking little tips here and there. So that doesn't take anything away from this season. I think Auckland definitely can win the championship, but from next season onwards, I don't expect this sort of at least ridiculous form to continue, right? Because new club coming in, this shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't be 8 points clear of team like a Victory in Sydney, who are well established, who we know their squad depth. Auckland, for as good as their bench is, I mean, yes, they did make good transfers, in the off season to, like I said, mold this team together completely from scratch, which is the most impressive part. But they shouldn't be 8 points clear. That's just ridiculous. So, we'll see in finals time if they're able to keep this momentum. But they've got so much experience as well, right? In this squad. So. And then along with Corica, who's been there, done that. He's won championship with Sydney as a coach, so he knows how to be in these positions and get the best out of his playing group and actually win trophies, right? Which is what obviously this club with this new fan base wants. So, I think the sky's the limit for Auckland.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just that relentless consistency that definitely does well to win your premierships, but they're going to have to beat someone in a grand final over 90 minutes. That's just going to be the worry. But they're definitely going as favourites. The other, on the theme of derby ramifications, we'll head to Melbourne, and this one's probably a little bit more beneath the surface, but Adelaide over the last month or so have really opened up the chance for someone else to join them in that battle for the top 2 spot, especially when we're talking about the context of Asian Champions League Elite qualification as well. And this Melbourne Derby offered the opportunity for both Victory and City to go closer to achieving that goal. And it felt a little bit like, Jacob, that both teams kind of just threw it away. They both had good moments going forward. They both had horrible moments defensively. 2 centre-backs giving up away the penalties that we'll get to. But such a big opportunity for both of these sides, and just neither of them took it by the scruff of the neck.
Yeah, it was actually really good watching for a neutral, and just it's what you want from a derby game as well, like end to end, a really open flowing game, lots going on. Roderick Miranda with a mistake is becoming frighteningly a frequent occurrence.
For me, that was the worst game that he's played for Victory.
Yeah, that was awful.
I've warned you guys weeks ago that he's such a liability. Like, I'll let you continue, Jacob. But
you're spot on, Christian. Like it just feels like he's lost a little bit of something over the last season and a half. I don't quite know what it is, but he's very, very prone. He's always has had that game in him where he can get a red card, he can make a stupid mistake, but a lot of centre backs do. But it feels like this season it's been almost sort of every second, every third game for him, and then he goes and tops it off with this one in a derby, which was just a distinctly below average performance. And but then, like I said, it made for a really entertaining game of football, which was the plus side.
And not just like the fact that he's a centre back and he should be defending the goal, and he gives away a goal like that. But you were the captain, you were the leader of this football club. You were 2-1 up in a derby in the second half in a game that means so much for your season. And it was such a naive penalty to give away. It was like such a low percentage challenge. He's sliding in. He's barely even actually made the challenge, and he's already got his hands on his head because he knows the mistake he's made. Yeah. It was horrible.
And that's the thing, right? Is that when you realize your mistake that early, why did you go in for the challenge in the first place if you knew straight away that it was not going to end well? It just was, was boneheaded, I think is the correct term to use, because it's like that he didn't think about it until afterwards, and it's like, well, that's what happens when you don't think about what you're doing, especially in the penalty area. So not a great game from him. And then you mentioned as well, on the other side of things, Ferreira for City had also a pretty big error. So at least in some ways it sort of cancelled it out. But the fact that, coming back to sort of how you introduced this, both teams just threw away chances to take the game by the scruff of the neck and really enforce themselves. And it's such an important game for the two sides to try and get that ACL elite spot, and it's like neither of them wanted it. So I don't know, I think it's been sort of the story of the season across the whole league, though. Outside of Auckland, who have been just mightily consistent, everybody has just been all over the place all season long. Nobody's really been able to pick up the pieces and do something with it. And this is going to be a reference that I doubt many of our audience will get, but it's very reminiscent of the 2007 college football season in that regard, in that there was this curse of the number 2 team would always lose their upset match against like unranked opposition. So it's like, it sort of has a similar feeling here in the A-League, where you got Auckland just running away with it in first, but everything below that is just pure chaos. It makes for very entertaining stuff, but it makes it really difficult from our perspective, because it feels like every week we're flipping and flopping and changing our opinions on things because of the way that one result went. But that's the reality of the league at this point. And at least it's entertaining, it's fun, but it would have been I'm sure equally frustrating for both sets of supporters who felt that their team should have come away with the win there.
Gee, that's a very niche reference.
It is.
Interesting. All right. I think I have a little more sympathy for Germain Ferreira with that penalty, because it's one of those where, Nikos is, I guess, game smart enough to get his foot just between Ferreira and the ball, right, as he's trying to play it out for a corner or something, I guess, right? So that feels stiff. For the record, I thought both were penalties, but I have a little bit more sympathy for him. But he is not loving Melbourne derbies, Christian. He made his starting debut in the first one of the year and got dragged at halftime because he was being absolutely bullied So I'm sure giving away a penalty and to send his team down is not adding to his fond memories of this fixture.
It was pretty unfortunate. I mean, the replays came up on the big screen and you try and have a closer look and think, oh, did he touch him? Did he clip him behind the leg? Probably did, but it was very difficult to see. Like if he did, it would have been by the absolute slightest of margins. But that's all you need for a play to go down, right? And to Vergos's credit, sort of took that opportunity, went to ground. It wasn't a dive. He just, he felt contact and he went down. That's what any player would do to win a penalty. So fair play to him. And ref obviously saw that as a penalty. But before that, I mean, I thought City, I was actually surprised at how well they came out of the blocks, because considering their recent form, like you've mentioned, how you've been disappointed with it, I thought maybe they would have gone their shells a bit, maybe retracted a bit, but no, they were like full out. They wanted to attack. They created the better chances. Probably should have been, 2-3 goals up. I mean, they had that chance where I forgot who took on Langerak over talking, and there was basically an open goal with 2 defenders on the goal line.
Romani or something
who had the ball. And they had 1 or 2 other chances where I think Langerak made 1 or 2 good saves. So City were actually pretty dominant. But then Victory woke up a bit, started to get back into the play. But again, it was just little passes outside the 18-yard box, trying to find a way, and there was just no solution until that penalty, which gave him a lifeline. And then into the second half, obviously, 3 minutes in, Santos scores that beautiful combination 1-2 play, gets him in front. But then that's the problem I have with Victory. Once they go ahead, it's like they should be hungry to go for 3, go for 4. From then, it was just like they didn't want to play anymore, and they just fell into City's hands. And that's how mistakes happen, like Miranda, where you just get caught in stupid decision making, where it could have been the opposite, where Victory could have been on the attack. Victory could have been the ones dominating with the ball possession, but it was the complete opposite. And they just sort of invited City back into it. And I think from a fan's perspective, from a Victory fan's perspective, that would have been, very disappointing, because you could see the momentum was shifting in Victory's favour. It's just that they just didn't want the ball. They wanted to protect the lead. And I think that's happened too many times this season. And it's probably something that has to change, especially if you're coming up against a team like Auckland, for example. You're trying to hold on to a 1-0 lead. Like you're gonna struggle, right? You need to just go out and get the second goal, right? So yeah, that's probably one of the concerns I've got for Victory. And also wanted to touch on Daniel Ozani, because I thought that was probably one of his worst games in a Victory top. I know he came off the bench, but the amount of times he lost the ball, I lost count. And you could hear the groans from the Victory supporters just grow louder and louder, and they were frustrated. It's like, this kid has so much talent, and he just seems like a completely different player from when Kisnobro left. And it's just sad to see, because he's got so much potential, and you can you can't knock him trying new things, trying to beat his man. He's doing that. He's just not being successful at it, right? It's just keeps losing the ball every time. Like he might beat one play, and then the second time, where he should be passing to his side, he just makes the wrong decision, keeps running with the ball, and loses it. So, like for him, in terms of confidence, I'm sure it's pretty low at the moment.
Yeah, and like last year, right, he was taking on players and absolutely dancing around them, right? Like there was 4 or 5 times where he'd get doubled up 2-on-1. And just like jink the ball through him and run around and take him on the baseline. It was incredible. And he just, whatever it is, that spark, he just hasn't had it this year. But one player who I think has gone underrated on the injury list for City is Andreas Kuhn. When he's playing in that 10 role or even as a kind of 8 and then drifting forward, he's creating so many opportunities. And, the players that City had out at the start of the season, the likes of the Matt Leckie, Andrew Naboo, these players, obviously we know the individual quality they have, but from what we saw from City for the first 2 or 3 months, Andreas Kuhn was very essential to a lot of the success that they were having, and they missed a lot of that midfield creativity when he was out. So I thought he made a very, very big impact upon returning, and he should be credited for his performance as well, because I thought he had a very, very good game. Now, Jacob, this isn't quite a derby, but it is a battle for New South Wales areas, I guess. It's one of the games, the Mariners and the Wanderers, that, you get good travelling support. The RBB showed up in great numbers. They had the TIFO and everything. It was all very cool and very impressive. And the Wanderers gave them a performance to boot. Mariners had moments, but all the goal scoring moments fell Western Sydney's way. And it feels like the last kind of month or so, they've really been under the microscope. Obviously, they've had an incredibly inconsistent season, but now their last 4 games, no losses, 10 points from a possible 12. And yes, they're probably beating teams they should beat, but that's not something that we could say about them before this month, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a significant improvement because you're finally getting these results that you probably should have been getting earlier on. And, you can look at it and go, oh, well, why weren't they getting it earlier on? Rah, 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 rah. But it's also a case of, well, they're doing it now, and I thought that they played extremely well against the Mariners, created so many scoring opportunities, which is sort of the hallmark of Alan Stagic's sides in general, is that, they're probably going to go up and score a bunch of goals. It's about how do they then defend those leads? How do they play out of possession and set themselves up in a shape that's going to work? And they did it here, right? Like, they had a good game. We were just talking before about the fact that they've scored like almost 40 goals but conceded over 30. So it's, it has been that very much sort of there's going to be a lot of goals in a Wanderers game sort of season for them. But in this one, it seemed like things started to click, and perhaps a good sign for the season moving forwards for this team, because they're in that fight now in the top 6, top 7 with those other teams. They're on 28 points, equal with City. City do have a game in hand though, but they're right in and amongst it. And if they can start to put things together, 3 wins in their last 4, they're unbeaten in their last 4 because the other one was a draw, of course. So it's like, this is going to be really the time of the season for them. If they can capitalize on this moving forwards, then there's no reason they can't finish even potentially top 4 with the way that some of the other sides have been playing recently.
Even 2, like second's not out of the picture.
But on the other hand, if they fall back into what they were doing earlier in the season, then they could fall out of the 6 entirely. So it's really now on them, right? Stajic has managed to sort of right the ship a little bit, right, and get them playing some good football again. It's about now continuing on with that, and it's about the players owning their performances, owning the goals and the ambitions and the aspirations of the club and themselves, right? If they want to play finals football, it's in their hands. If they want to play a home semi-final, it's in their hands. They can do this. So it's about making sure that they do it consistently. It's not something that we've been able to say for really any teams so far this season, but the Wanderers now are on a good run. It's something that Western couldn't quite manage. They had a couple of poor games after a really good run. If the Wanderers can do it, then like you said, Lockie, there's no reason top 2 isn't out of the question.
It's interesting. We're coming into a round where that 3 to 6 bracket, so Western United, Victory, Western Sydney and City, are all playing the bottom 4 in the competition. So we've had a couple of games here and there where these teams are going up against each other and they're 6-pointers and they jostle between each other. But now it's like who can actually beat the teams that they're supposed to beat. And, the Wanderers historically have been slipping up in these kind of games. So have Melbourne Victory as well. They're another big culprit of it. So it's a different challenge for them coming up. But there was a couple of moments in this game that, PK League, throw it at it, we'll do whatever. Do you think that Pantazopoulos' goal kick, Christian, was on target? Because if so, has Zach Sapsford just robbed him of what may have been the longest goal ever scored in football? Because I know some goals have happened from goal kicks before, but he's played this ball from actually a few yards back inside the 6-yard box. I'm just wondering, could that have been the longest goal ever? It was on target, would have been considered an own goal?
Well, it came off the keeper's head, didn't it? And that was my initial reaction. Like, it was going to be an own goal anyway. But then I'm thinking back, even if it came off the keeper's head, it'd still count as the goal, like the Wanderers keeper's goal, wouldn't it? If it was on target.
Well, it was the centre back Pantazopoulos that took it.
So, like, once he took it and then it hit the Mariners keeper, with Pavlicic hit his head.
Yeah.
Didn't it brush his head?
Yeah. He
just a little bit.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be an own goal if it's on target, yeah.
Well, what's the rule, Jay? Like, because he intentionally played at the ball.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to think.
I don't know if it's about a significant deflect. I know it used to be about if the initial shot was on or off target.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
They determined it. But I feel like that rule's gone out the window recently, and they just seem to make it up as they go along and just pick whatever the cooler story is. So I have a feeling they would have just stuck with, had this been on target and gone straight in without Sapsford getting on the end of it, they may have just given the goal to Pantazopoulos, which would have been pretty insane. But on the other side of things, to maybe try and save the blushes of Pavlicic a little bit, they might have given it as an own goal, because while it's bad to score an own goal, at least it sounds like he gave a try to play the ball, right?
Yeah.
Like he completely misplayed it from the get-go. Like that was awful goalkeeping, but at least, you know, with the own goal, it's recognition he got his head to the ball, so he kind of did a little bit of something. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure actually on what the ruling is on that. I might have to do a bit of research on that.
You can't blame Sapsford for tapping it.
Nah, you can't. A striker's going to do
make sure
as a striker, you've got to increase the goal tally. You know, if Tony Popovich is looking at the score sheets or whatever, the statistics, it's like, okay, score an extra goal, I'll add him to the Socceroos team. So you know, that's all he's got to do as a striker. So no blame on him.
Nah, for sure. It was a tough weekend, though, for young keepers. We've seen it's been a theme of this A-League season. Adam Pavlicic, he's played a couple of times in the Champions League Elite, but this was his A-League debut, and I don't think he's going to look back on it very fondly. He had that moment, obviously, to play in Sapsford. Then the penalty late in the game. He thought he'd redeemed himself by saving it, but no, Christian, have another crack at it. He went off his line early. It's just another edition of young goalkeeper moments that we seem to be tallying up this campaign.
Nightmare. And this isn't the first time, right? Because in the very first Champions League game, I remember we did the live stream. Didn't he get the red card?
He did. He got suspended. Yeah, he got a red card.
It was just a rash decision. He just went off his line, and it was just, he was the last man, I'm pretty sure. And just a bad tackle. I think it was a straight red card. And from there, like, the confidence surely just went downwards from there, right? Because everyone was hyping him up as, you know, such this promising goalkeeper, which is obviously enough pressure in itself. But then to make your debut in the Champions League and to put up a performance like that and get a red card, it obviously doesn't do you any favours. So, look, it's definitely a learning experience for him. We've seen a couple of young goalkeepers in the competition this season make some very poor decisions. You know, we can look back on countless examples, but hopefully he could just learn off this. Yeah, I hope he's not punished for it, you know, in any way. But at the end of the day, the coach has to make his decision. Yeah, like if he's going to make these rash decisions time after time after time, you can only make, you know, one call and bench him until he learns from his mistakes another way, you know, or another. So, yeah, hopefully it doesn't do him too much damage, because he does have a lot of talent. He's a good shot stopper, and yeah, hopefully he can rebound from it.
Unfortunately for him, he's got some pretty stiff competition at the Mariners as well. H. Cullen has had a pretty good season as well. So, you know, when you have that starting spot, you really got to take it with both hands. So, obviously, I'd imagine we'd probably see H. Cullen sooner rather than later. But yeah, it'd be bouncing between the two. Also, Ethan Cox, who we'll talk a little bit more later, but you know, that one going through his legs at 3-0, admittedly a little inconsequential, but
yeah, I can't even blame him for it, to be honest. I mean, he faced so many shots on target, just completely uncontested by defenders. I thought he had actually an excellent game between the sticks, even though he conceded 3, and that one just straight through his legs as well. You know, I think it doesn't accurately reflect the performance he had, but yeah, it's not a great look, especially when it's, you know, Delianov has, you know, not been fantastic for Adelaide this season, and Cox gets his chance and comes in and, you know, does that. It's not a good look.
All right, well, we'll talk about more of Adelaide in a second, but I wonder, Kota Mizunuma, has there ever been a better match, Jacob, between a player and a club in football history? It feels like he is just exactly the shot of happiness and enthusiasm that the Jets need. It feels like they've been a bit down on their luck. They've had opportunities, but it hasn't worked out their way. And all of a sudden, this guy comes over from Japan. He's got boatloads of quality, boatloads of just absolute joy that exudes out of him. It's impossible to not like this guy. And it helps that he's a wicked footballer as well. He's just lifted the vibe of the Newcastle Jets so much. He's been whipping in balls for fun. He's establishing a pretty good partnership with LA Rose. And it's working. They're winning games of football. They're the only team apart from Auckland that can say they're undefeated in their last 5. And all of a sudden, they're entering into this conversation of being a bolter for a final spot. They have to play Auckland next week after a bye that they'll serve this week. And that'll be a real test for them. But are we allowing this possibility to enter our brains as well?
They have been very good recently. But, you know, are we should we perhaps be a little bit more cautious after what we managed to do to Perth last season?
Yeah,
You know, like we were having the same conversation around the same time last season about Perth going on a good run. It's not out of the realm of possibility, and then they tanked their season and just, you know, completely imploded. So let's not go that far yet. But I agree with you that Kota Mizunuma has been just a tremendous addition, not just to the Jets but to the league as a whole. Right, like he's like a golden retriever. Like it just infectious happiness. Loves everything. He's like Danny Rojas in Ted Lasso. Like football is life. Like just so happy. Just it's awesome to see. And then you add into the fact that he's a tremendous footballer as well, which is something that the Jets were looking for. Yeah, match made in heaven. And it's crazy, right? Because it feels like there's been so many attempts to try and get players like this, not necessarily from the Jets, but just across the league, right? And I can't really point to any other occasions where a player like this has come from overseas and been like, I mean, Zinedine Mishash last year kind of was in a way, but in a slightly different way, right? Like he was a bit more stoic on the pitch, but then outside, you know, in his interviews after the match and stuff, he was just the most likable guy there was. You know, it kind of gives shades of that. But yeah, it's awesome to see for the Jets because you know, I think their record doesn't necessarily reflect how well they have played at times this season. They've just gotten unlucky. Things haven't fallen their way, not been able to find those results. And now that they've got this quality up front and a partnership that's really working and they're scoring goals and, you know, they're on a roll, it's awesome to see because the Jets are one of those teams that it just feels like they're perpetually a bottom half side, right, in the league. I think Chris was saying in the group chat that they haven't ever finished bottom two, which I don't believe. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they've always sort of been near to it, but not quite ever actually reaching that low. So you know, they're just that sort of a team, and they've had a couple of good seasons here or there. And this is a chance with how the league is stacked up this season, with how tight things are, for them to potentially go on this run and get back into finals. It would be awesome to see because when the stadium's full out there in Newcastle, packed with fans, we saw it in that grand final run that they made all those years back. How awesome was the atmosphere there, you know, and how the whole town turned up and everybody was around them. It's the sort of stuff we want to see from the A-League. It's what Auckland have managed to do this year. It's what Adelaide have managed to do this year. It's what Perth have kind of managed to do, even with the performances that they've had. I think the more that teams can do that and can tap into that, the better. So for Newcastle, if that means, you know, cloning Kota Mizunuma somehow, then go for it, right? Like because the more players you can have like that in your team, the better, because they bring an infectious energy, and it sort of, I think, almost reinvigorated the side bringing him in, right? Because maybe things were getting a bit stale and stagnant in the dressing room, and it's like, what are we doing? We're not quite there, but we know we should be doing better than we are because of the way we're playing. And this guy comes in and he's just here to, you know, play football, get along with everybody and have a really, really good time. And it's like all of a sudden it brings that energy back into the change room, and everybody's ready to go and they're firing on all cylinders again. So, you know, it's the sort of thing that can happen when you change coach. We don't talk about it often when you sign a new player, but it's been exactly that, I think, with him.
Well, maybe with all these young kids running around, Jacob, they didn't have any hands that built Australia. They needed some hands that built Japan to come in and show them how it's done. He's just such a fun guy, Christian. He's just so likable, and he's a good footballer. And he's made a magnificent tonal shift, it feels like, to the Newcastle Jets. I tell you why this feels a little bit different to 2024 Perth for me, is that number one, it's that player inclusion. It felt like with Perth, you know, that what Alan Stajic was doing, you know, that in terms of how they were playing football was starting to click a little bit, and the actual system was the change. Whereas you throw in Kota here to the Jets, Lockie Rose returning from injury is a massive factor as well. Obviously, that's then putting a lot of importance on their fitness and being able to play week in, week out. But they've also made players around them better. Eli Adams and Clayton Taylor have increased their attacking output as well, which has helped them on their way. Do you see this the same way that we were seeing Perth last year? Do you have that confidence in them, or are you being hesitant like Jacob?
It's tough. I mean, like Perth, you knew that it was going to be a massive rebuilding process, right? It's like for Newcastle, again, they've still got a long way to go. I think we can't jump to too many conclusions, even though they've had this good run of form, right? But in saying that, I wouldn't be surprised if they sneak or at least be in the conversation for top 6.
It's the year to do it.
It is, yeah.
You know, because like we said before, like so many teams are dropping points. Just it really is unpredictable, right? The only team is Auckland, who you know what you're going to get, right? Where teams are just dropping points left, right, and center. And for the Jets, this is the point of the season where you need to pick up your form. This is the right time to do it. This is the time to exploit other teams' deficiencies. And like, I'm just looking at their fixture list. As I say that, it is pretty tough. They've got obviously Auckland next, playing at home, and then they've got, I think, Melbourne City and Western United next. So yeah, it's going to be tough, but I mean, I think that 3-0 win at home against the Victory a couple of weeks ago really spurred them on. It really gave them that belief, because we've seen a couple of times this season, like the MacArthur game at the start of this season, where you saw glimpses of what they're capable of, but there's just been too many, I guess, misfortune incidents, right? And just luck not going their way. And perhaps this is sort of the football gods, turning for them, as opposed to against them, right? So I think honestly they're a smoky for top 6. I'm not saying they'll get it, but I think they can be very close. You know, depending on if they can obviously maintain this form, because at the moment, in terms of on the pitch, you know, their play style and how they move the ball going forward, they're actually very exciting to watch. And we knew that. It's just that, how long can they sustain that for, right? They've done it for a few games. Can they keep it going? I think they can, honestly.
Very interesting. In terms of teams going on these trends, obviously Newcastle Jets have had a good run of form and they're going up. Jacob, Adelaide United have had a couple of losses in recent weeks, and there has been reasons for that. But again, we keep hammering this home, but it just goes to show how tight it is. Yes, they're 8 points off Auckland in top spot. They're also only 5 points away from Sydney FC in 7th and missing out on finals entirely, right? They've really struggled since the departure of a lot of their young Socceroos, Panakikianis, Luka Jovanovic, Johnny Yule, and a few others as well. Is it that simple? There were also some injury issues this week as well. I think, Ryan Kiddo and Dylan Piraeus, right? So Piraeus particularly has been a very important player for them. Can you put it down simply to personnel absences, or is there a little bit more to it?
No, I don't think you can put it down to that, because throughout a season you're going to have injuries, you're going to have players go on international duty. It's a given, especially when you're Adelaide United. You take pride in your youth development. Of course you're going to hope and expect that your young players get those chances to go and represent the underage teams at tournaments in Asia and around the world, right? So the fact that you lose players should not come as a surprise. And yet it almost seems like it's taken the team by surprise, because
it still hurts though, even though it's coming.
It does, but losing 4 under 20 players shouldn't mean that you're suddenly playing nobody in the correct position on game day. And, okay, yes, it didn't help that Kito and Piraeus were out as well. But even then, I mean, you've got Ethan Aleaguemen, who's been one of the best central midfielders this season, playing at left back, and then all of a sudden the team can't move the ball through the centre of the park. It's like, it feels like they reacted too much to what the situation was when they didn't necessarily need to, right? Like, it's one of those really irritating things, because this was a big chance for Adelaide to try and close that gap on Auckland, which is starting to grow now. You're against Western United, who, historically played pretty well against. They've been on a pretty poor run of form recently, not as good as they have been. Obviously the biggest thing is you're going away to them, and playing away in Tarnier has proven pretty difficult for a few sides this season. But if you've got aspirations of being a top 2 side, or, I mean, the owners came out at the start of the season and said their goal was top 4, you've got to at least get a result from this game. You've got to at least come away with a point. And coming away with nothing and looking very uninspired throughout as well, it was a very disappointing sign. So while the absences didn't help, I think what it did was highlight that there's a bigger deficiency at the club in terms of their recruitment strategy, which I think that they have pretty badly botched in January in not bringing anybody in to build that depth, because you're going to know at that point we're going to have players go on international duty. And the fans were saying it, right? It's like, hello, we're losing a starting centre-back and Jordan Elsie's still injured. Like, what are we going to do about it? And the club, who have aspirations of a top 4 finish, said, we're not going to do anything about it. And, and then you lose a couple of games in a row. All of a sudden, Bart Vriends is in a situation he's probably never been in before in his career, where he's the only defender in the starting 11, and he's got to play with a bunch of people who have, Isaias was the most experienced defender next to him, and he's a defensive midfielder, like just a whole mess across the park. So I think, it doesn't help, and it's put the club in this situation, but it's a situation they shouldn't have been in, because they should have prepared for it. So it's disappointing from that perspective, because this is a team that I think is very, very good, and I think we've seen that this season when they're on. It's something Simon Hill said in commentary, right? When they are on, they are one of the best sides in the league by far, but when they're not, they look like one of the worst. It's such a stark difference between the best and the worst in this team. So it's disappointing. Fans are a bit frustrated now with this run of form, and with the biggest game of the season coming up against Auckland, right? Like, this is, we were saying before, almost sort of the last chance to stop Auckland just walking away with the title. I'm not even going to say running away with the title, walking away with the title at this point. But with the form that they're in, there seems to be a lack of faith and belief that that Adelaide are going to pull it off. So it's an immensely disappointing result. But then, on the other hand, Western United are going to be absolutely thrilled with that. That was a fantastic performance from them, and credit to John Aloisi for the way that he set the side up. He realised Adelaide were short on players. They're missing their best central midfielder. So you don't have a lot of work to do in the middle of the park. So just press really, really heavily on their wide players, and that's what they did all game long. And Harry Crawford came in to start in that sort of Piraeus role, youngster, 18 years old, his first start, and just got shut out of the game completely. And it's, credit to Western for a good game plan. They delivered what they needed to do. They came away with a pretty comfortable, cushy win. That penalty was just a moment of why you got. He's had 2 bites at the cherry there and didn't get the ball either time. And it just happened to be Ibasuki that converted the penalty against the Reds, of course, who let him go in the off season. Just frustrating from Adelaide. But Western, this is a chance to perhaps just claw their way back into it. Right? They've fallen off a cliff, but they've caught themselves halfway down, and now they've got some climbing to do again. This is a good boost of morale, and a good show that when they can execute their game plan, they're pretty well unstoppable. So it was really very much a game unlike the Melbourne Derby, that was clearly one team being a lot better than the other, and just executing well and not making mistakes, and the other team not having a good game plan, making mistakes and not playing well. So more sort of shades of Auckland and Wellington than the Melbourne Derby.
Christian, I think Jacob's being a little harsh on Adelaide. I think.
When isn't he?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Because I think, as much as you can see personnel things happening, it doesn't mean that the clubs have the resources necessarily to, cover players for a short span of time that then you have to keep on your books for the 3 or 4 months at least after that until the season ends, right? So there's only so much you can do, especially as a club in the A-League, and then you add the injuries on top of that. You kind of just have to say that this is a period we're going to fight through with a fair bit of difficulty, and then when we come out the other side of it, we'll be back to our full stocks. And I know, even just in comparison to the rest of the league, probably the defensive stocks are a bit low at Adelaide United, but these things come and go, and they're sitting at a point where they are 31 points and they're sitting second on the table, and they will receive a boost when all these players come back. Now, we'll get to it, but unfortunately, these young guns are going to be away for a little while longer, which means they're going to have to go into this game against Auckland again undermanned. And as we've already touched on, if they lose it, that is probably the premiership race all but over.
It's Adelaide's fault, isn't it, for investing in youth? Yeah. I could see Jacob. I could see Jacob's face when you were saying that. Like, he just wanted to get in there and just start another 5-minute rant. But I do get the point. Like, obviously, you've got to, you got to fight it within you, right? It's a period where you just win at all costs. Just find anything, win ugly, just do anything you can. But I still think, even with the players out, they've still got more potential that they're not tapping into. Like, I saw your tweet, Jacob, over the weekend saying Bart Vren's, like, this is nowhere near the defender as like he was performing in Europe, right? And he's come to Adelaide, and he's a completely different defender the past few weeks, right? So it's like little stuff like that where surely it's a system issue. It's different. Like, Carl Viet surely has to take some responsibility. Surely you can set your team up better, play players in the right positions. Don't tweak it too much. Yes, you've got players, going overseas, fair enough, you're losing players, but just don't panic. It seems like he's just throwing everything, sort of out the pram, and it's just like, oh, what am I going to do now? It's like he's just fighting for answers that the answers just aren't there, and he knows that he's doing it anyway because he's just fighting within himself to actually make it work. He's like, deep down, I know it's not going to work, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Just
got to do something. Yeah,
I'm just got to do.
You got to name 11 players on the team sheet.
You do.
You do. It's just looking at the squad, some of it just doesn't gel. It just doesn't make sense, right? And Jacob can touch on more of it. And it was sort of like they just came into the game thinking that they were going to lose, right? It was like a free pass. Like, if we lose, we lose. If we take a point, okay, that's a bonus. It's like there's no pressure in that sense. But that's when you should be taking more initiative. You should be taking the game to Western United, because it's not like Western United are anything special. Like, yes, we've raved on about them saying they're playing good football, this and that, but I know you're away from home. Like, come on, just give a bit more, give something extra, So, because, with the under 20s, it could be, another game or two where obviously they might have to do without those players a bit more. So you've got to learn to adapt and find different ways, right? And Calvitt would have known this before the season started. It's not like he knew last second, oh, we're going to lose all these players for international duty. Like, he fully knew that this was going to happen. So what has he been doing on the training park to say, okay, I'm going to plug this player in this position. I'm going to try and rotate here. I'm going to get this player to be a bit more versatile. Like, where is the...
I'm actually going to throw him a bit of a lifeline with this, right? Because, and Lord knows I've been heavily critical of Carl Viet throughout the years, but I'm going to throw him a lifeline here because he addressed it at the start of the season. He said that our recruitment as a team has not been good enough, full stop. He said that outright at the start of the season, sort of going against what the owners were trying to say of we're going to push on and we're going to be one of the best sides this season. He said our recruitment hasn't been good enough. So he's been aware of that, but then that does come to your point, Christian, of then what has he done to remedy that within his control? And it's clearly been, well, not enough, because he's got players playing way out of position. I mean, you should not be playing your number 8 as a left back, and he looked like a number 8 playing at left back in that game, Aleaguemen, because he was all over the park. He was involved in the first level of the press at times, and I was like, hold on, he's supposed to be part of the back 3 in this rest defense. Why is he pressing the striker all of a sudden? Like, it just, it felt like things were not quite right there. And I do want to at least acknowledge that Carl Viet is as frustrated at the lack of recruitment as the fans are. So, he's on the same side there, but it's a case of, there are still things you can do as a coach to change things up. It's been one way of playing all season long, and now that you've got key players out who make this happen, like a Dylan Parias, right? His role is so pivotal to the way that Adelaide wants to play, and that it holds the width. He's still involved in defensive transition a little bit, but not as much as a full-on wing back, and he gets really high up the pitch and he's good in the final third and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's such a unique role, and it only works as a system that Adelaide have put in place. But when you don't have him and he is so key to it, what's your change? How are you going to change to that? And the change was, we're just going to bring another player in who hasn't played this way before and expect him to do the same thing. And it sort of seems a little bit short-sighted there. So while I will give him a bit of leeway in terms of recruitment because he's as frustrated as everyone else, I'm not going to cut him any slack in the coaching department because that's still his job.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks largely in part to 2 of those Adelaide United players that are away on international duty. The good news is that the young Socceroos are through to the 2025 Under-20 World Cup in Chile, which is something they haven't done for over a decade, qualify for an Under-20 World Cup, which is very exciting. Jovanovic and Kikianis getting on the score sheet in a 3-2 win over Iraq in the quarterfinals of the Asian Cup. They had to come from behind twice to do it. There were some absolute belters of goals in this game, capped off by Alex Badalatu's winner. Absolutely the best of a lot. This kind of flying volley in midair. Of course, the current Melbourne Victory player on loan from the Western Sydney Wanderers. That'll be a welcome inclusion for Victory fans, I'm sure. But this was sensational, Christian. They were seriously tested in this game, and they pulled out the quality when they needed it, the quality that puts you in good positions at World Cups.
Yeah, I was just driving home from the Melbourne Derby just to try and hurry up and get a glimpse of the game. I got in time just before half time, and I see a message from Paletti in the group chat saying, "Oh no, 1-0 down." I'm thinking, God, it's Australian football. It's the course. It's like, we're not going to qualify for another World Cup. I'm like, this cannot be happening again. But like, to be down twice and to still show that grit, like, that's tremendous, right? From an under-20 side, that's what you need, right, to get through in these quarterfinal stages and progress deep. So yeah, a couple of cracking goals, like you said. It just shows the quality, and I've been impressed with this side throughout the whole tournament. The group stage, I think the football they've been showing has been great, and we've looked back on past youth tournaments for Australia, whether it be the Olyroos, under-20s, under-17s, what have you. And it's like they're not getting the results, but also the performances on the pitch have been questionable as well. And I think the opposite can be said in this tournament, where that it has impressed me in that aspect, which is pleasing to see. So, we harped on about missing so many World Cups over the years, and that's hampered the youth development. And we can't overlook how important this is for the future crop of this generation, right? To be on the world stage and to play in these big tournaments and increase your youth development and test yourself against the best young players in the world. It can only do yourself good, right? So surely something's happening, doing right in terms of the coaching and the setup and all of that, which there have been questions in the past. So all in all, just happy to get through, to be honest. And then see you've got on the run down and playing Japan in the semis. Like, Japan have always been our benchmark, right? Whether it be the Socceroos, whether it be the youth, and it's just the age-old sort of, we just can never seem to get past them. They're just so technically good on the ball, and it's like, it's hard to find answers against them. And in this game as well, obviously Australia will go in as underdogs, but I've seen enough from them to put up a really good fight. Not to say that they're going to win, but I'm really expecting a tight tussle.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the point now where it's the Final Four, and you've got 2 games of football away from a continental trophy, which is definitely what this team should be aiming for. Completely agree with you, Christian. They've been just so impressive in this tournament by a very just entertaining team to watch, which is not often something you say about Australian national teams. But you're right, they will take on Japan. That game is at 10:30 on Wednesday night. They beat Iran 2-1 in the quarterfinals, so we'll also join Australia at the World Cup, along with Saudi Arabia and South Korea, who will play in the other semi-final, trying to make it through to win a continental trophy, as I say, which would be very cool. The other national team, of course, that was in action recently on Monday morning was the Matildas. They went down 2-1, unfortunately, to the Americans. Thankfully, a vastly improved performance from last Friday, which probably says more about that game against Japan than it does about this one against the US. But yeah, much tighter margin, a goal to Michelle Heyman. If you want to hear more about that, Paletti and myself, we did a reaction video over on the Dubcast YouTube video, which we can link you to. Also, Paletti and Burke will talk about it, no doubt, on this week's episode of the Dubcast, which releases over there on YouTube and podcasting platforms every Wednesday morning. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. It's been a good one. There's lots of very interesting games of A-League football coming up ahead of us. Jacob Stevens, thank you.
It's been good to be back after a little break of one episode, back on track for the 100 in, hopefully, all things going well, a week's time. And yeah, I've still got to figure out what my celebration for that one's going to be, but I'm thinking about it. So yeah, I'm planning for something big.
Can't wait to see it. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, Lockie.
Cheers. All right. Thank you all very much for listening at home. We appreciate your company. As always, we've got that big under-20 semi-final, which will be, I'm sure, one of the main talking points on Friday's episode, which is when we will next see you. But thank you again for listening today. We'll see you later. Goodbye.